Black Beauty Part 2. Time passed quickly at Birtwick Hall. I was treated well and looked forward to the days when Ginger and I were harnessed to the carriage to take the squire or his wife for a drive. One morning in late autumn, John hitched me to the dog cart so I could drive Squire Gordon to town on business. It had rained heavily the night before, and there was a strong wind blowing. We had a long way to travel, but everything went smoothly until we came to a low wooden bridge. "The river's rising fast," warned the man at the toll gate. "I think tonight will be very bad indeed." We made it safely into town, where I was given food and allowed to rest. But as the squire's business took longer than expected, we did not start out for home until very late in the afternoon. By then the wind was whipping quite fiercely. I'd never been out in such a storm, and I was nervous about the weather. But I remembered what my mother had said about always doing my best, and so I trotted on. Suddenly, with a frightening crack, a huge oak tree came crashing down across the road in front of me. I stopped in my tracks, terrified. "Whew, that was a close call," said the squire. I could tell he was shaken too. "And how will we get to the bridge now?" "We'll have to jumble back and take a longer road, Squire," replied John. "It'll make us late, but Beauty doesn't seem tired yet." By the time we reached the bridge, it was almost dark. The wind was still blowing fiercely, and I could hear the river rushing madly below. I started to cross the bridge, but as soon as my feet touched the planks, I knew that something was wrong. I stopped and would go no further. "Go on, Beauty," called the squire, but I didn't move. John gave me a touch of his whip, but I refused to stir. "Something's wrong, sir," said John. He leaped out of the cart and tried to lead me forward. "Come on, Beauty, what's the matter?" Oof, how I wished I could speak. But there was no way for me to tell them that the bridge was unsafe. I could only stand there and not move a step. Just then, we saw a lantern being waved frantically on the other side. The man at the toll gate cried out, "You there, stop! Stop, I say! The bridge is broken in the middle and part of it's washed away. If you go any further, you'll end up in the river." "What?" exclaimed the squire. "Oh, thank you, Beauty," said John, and gave me a loving pat on the nose. "I knew something was wrong for you to act that way." Our journey home was a long one. When we finally reached Birtwick Hall, Mrs. Gordon ran out of the house crying, "Oh, thank goodness you're safe. It's so late. I've been imagining all sorts of things. Did you have an accident?" "No, my dear," the squire replied, "but we might not be here right now if it wasn't for Black Beauty." John led me to my stall, where he was generous with food and my bed of straw. I was glad, for by then I was very tired. Not long after the incident at the bridge, Squire Gordon and his wife decided to visit some friends. The journey would take nearly 2 days, and Ginger and I were chosen to pull the carriage. The first day of travel was long, but pleasant enough. By now, Ginger and I were quite fond of each other, and we took advantage of any long, flat stretches of open road to talk and share stories. It reminded me of the times I had been harnessed with my mother at Farmer Gray's. By sundown, we reached the town where we would spend the night. Ginger and I were glad to have our harnesses unbuckled. We were taken to a hotel stable, where a quick, efficient hostler rubbed us down and fed us. Later in the evening, when I was almost asleep, a young man with a pipe came in to gossip with the hostler, who was caring for the newly arrived horse. "Would you do me a favor?" I heard the hostler ask. "Run up into the loft and bring down some hay for this stall. Just make sure you put down your pipe." After that, I stayed awake just long enough to hear the young man walk across the loft overhead. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke up quite suddenly. It was completely dark. The air was thick and hard to breathe, and I heard Ginger coughing. There were strange sounds coming from the loft, a soft rushing like the wind, then crackling and snapping. I didn't know what was happening, but I began to tremble all over. Some were pulling at their halters. Other horses were stamping nervously. All of them were awake, too. After what seemed like an eternity, the hostler came running into the stable. He untied some horses and tried to lead them out, but he was so frightened himself that he only added to our panic. The horses refused to move. "Come on, you silly beasts," he muttered. "You gotta get out before it's too late." After failing to coax several horses out of the stable, the hostler tried to drag me out of my stall, but I wouldn't move. How could I? Danger seemed to be everywhere, and there was no one I could trust. "Come on," he cried. But when he saw it was no use, he ran out of the stable. The crackling sound grew louder, and I could see red lights flickering on the far wall. Cries of "Fire! Fire!" came from outside. Flames leaped out of the loft, and the rushing noise became a violent, thundering roar. I was nearly crazed with fear. Then I heard John's voice, quiet and cheerful, as though nothing was wrong. "Come, my pretties, we must be off now, so wake up and come along." Ah, here was someone I could trust. He came to my stall first. "Come, Beauty, on with your bridle, and we'll soon be out of this mess." His soft voice was calm and soothing, just what I needed in my panic, and I gladly obeyed him. In no time, my bridle was on. Then he took off his scarf, tied it over my eyes, and with some gentle patting and coaxing, led me out of the stable. In the safety of the yard, he slipped the scarf off my eyes and shouted, "Here, someone take this horse while I go back for the other." "Ginger!" I whinnied frantically to my friend as I watched John run back into the burning stable. What a commotion there was in the stable yard. People and horses were everywhere. Frantic whinnies mixed with excited voices as the fire grew worse. The tremendous roar of flames engulfing the stable thundered over all the noise of the yard. I kept my eyes on the stable door, wishing that John would bring Ginger out. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from inside. I feared the worst. Then, seconds later, I saw John lead Ginger from the burning building. "Make way for the fire engines! Stand back!" someone shouted. The next thing I knew, there was a deafening clatter as two large horses pulling a heavy fire engine dashed into the yard. Ginger and I were led away to a nearby stable where we gladly got some rest after our terrible fright. She told me later that if she hadn't heard me whinnying from the stable yard, she wouldn't have had the courage to follow John outside. The next morning, we heard John and the hostler talking. No one knew for sure how the fire had started, but it was thought that the man with the pipe was the cause. "I'll say one thing, my friend," the hostler said. "Your horses know who they can trust. It's one of the hardest things in the world to get horses out of a stable when there's a fire or a flood." The hostler was right. Ginger and I did know who to trust. It was lucky for both of us that John was there that night.